Well, welcome to Disc 1, Module 4, which is the second arena, the Sensual Arena. And you are welcome to consider this the Sense Arena, if you would like. Sensual Arena tends to roll off the tongue a little better, but this is by no means a reference to any sort of sexually explicit connotation of the Sense Arena. It is strictly talking about the five senses. Though, no doubt, those five senses are utilized in such a representation of the word sensual. That is not what we are aiming at accomplishing. This is strictly speaking of your five senses, and the data that you collect through those five senses is very much going to impact that modulation of your brain frequency, of the wavelength that you're working from. And as we have discussed, it is not necessarily important to have your brain operating at a high frequency or a low frequency as much as it is important to have it operating at an optimal frequency. And there are various times when you want your brain frequency to be at an increased level. But not only that, the frequency is not the only thing that we try to regulate, as much as the data that's on those lines of on that frequency. And so the Sensual Arena is critical because it is your interaction to the physical world. It is what allows all sensory data to to be inputted into the conscious arena. Without the Sensual Arena, you are effectively in a coma. You are without the ability to process any incoming data, and therefore you are not coherent, you are not communicative, and your spirit is languishing as a result as well. Your spirit, as we've spoke before, is like a byproduct of all of these inputs and all of the psychology that is encapsulated in your subconscious and in your conscience. And as that signal enters the eternal arena and bounces back and gets absorbed and distributed through each of the arenas, there's this modulation taking process, each arena being coupled at a specific frequency, and the modulation that's taking process is producing a byproduct, an overtone, an electromagnetic field, if you will, and that field being your spirit, your personality, your who you are, and it creates relationships. It's what you use to interact with people. It's how we know you and what we know you by. And therefore the Sensual Arena is such a critical arena to be cognitive of and aware of and learn to control, because the Sensual Arena is going to be the gatekeeper. And we will see that in our training here. That determines what comes into your conscious arena and what gets processed into your emotional arena and all the way through the 7 arenas of the human experience. And so here is the Sensual Arena in our model. It is the second layer. Interestingly enough, it's a color that is very similar to the violet color of the physical arena, but rather it is indigo. And indigo, when put up next to violet, indigo almost seems like a byproduct of violet. If you look at it from that perspective, you could almost say, you could even say that the violet is a shadow of indigo, as if indigo is casting that shadow. But in relationship to our model, the physical arena is the more solid arena and the instigator of any information, and therefore I would argue that the violet arena, the outer arena, and even in color theory, if you will, that violet color is theoretically producing the indigo color more so than the indigo producing the violet. And of course, one color doesn't physically produce the other one, but it seems to be a closer tie than between any of the others. It seems to be a closer tie than between red and orange, or orange and yellow. And this is just my perception. Indigo and violet, I used to always think, why didn't they just make it 6 Roy G. Bi or something, or Roy G. BP, and just make those two colors purple, because there is a very faint difference between them, but nonetheless there is one. And the sensual color is a more passive color than the bold violet. It seems to be a much more relaxed color, passive. If you taking a look here at this rainbow that you see in the sky, it's very difficult to see the delineation between the indigo and the violet. The red, orange, yellow, green, and blue, and then it seems to be violet and indigo are almost meshed together. And of course that's not necessarily true, but these rainbows are caused by the way water is reflected in the light enters the little droplet of water and it gets refracted or bent, and then it reflects off the back and gets refracted again. And what we end up seeing is a cross-section of the light that acts as a prism and breaks open the light. And at some point we should do I'll do a supplement in the institution to describe to you exactly how a rainbow works, and then give you some nifty scientific realities of the rainbow. And if you could see the rainbow from the center, it would actually be a complete ball, completely refracted that way. And there's a lot of math and a lot of other interesting aspects to the rainbow, which really opens up your mind to the physical arena, to recognize that these little bubbles of the rainbow, they're all around at all times, yet they seem to follow some of the principles of quantum mechanics, in that they are only where you are in perception to your positioning to them. So they're always there and always not there at the same time, and yet they are relative to your positioning from them. If you're on one side of the rainbow and I'm on the other, we see a different aspect of the rainbow. And but that's a discussion for another day. But nonetheless, I see this Sensual Arena is in our indigo arena, our indigo color of the rainbow, and this Sensual Arena is passive. It's very light and light-hearted, and we're going to see that as we check it out. It is the second arena, and it is the only way that any information gets into the emotional and conscious and subconscious arenas and on into the eternal arena. There's no other way to interact with your physical world. So let's take a look at how we define the Sensual Arena. And basically, the Sensual Arena it's made up of the five senses. All five of your senses, your sight, your hearing, taste, smell, and touch, all contribute to this arena. And this arena is as bold, and it is as bodacious and as robust and alive as our five senses allow it to be. And some people recognize this, and they discover that if they overload their five senses, or one of the five senses, then they're able to excite the Sensual Arena to a degree that stimulates our emotions, and then creates some chemical responses in our brains and in our bodies, and the result becomes a mini high or a euphoric type of experience. And those are absolutely viable in that they do exist, but the problem is we don't always consider the cost of that experience, both on our physical bodies, on our mental, on our minds, or should I say our brains, our brain cells, and also the impact that it causes us psychologically. Should any of those extremes be applied to one of the five senses to a point where they impact us psychologically, then we've overdone it. But nonetheless, this Sensual Arena, you can see why it's important to understand it, and also important to make sure we control it. The reason here for putting the scientific terms, if you will, of each of these senses is simply so that as you're listening to other programs and learning other things, you at least have a reference to what they're talking about when they use those particular words. No doubt some of these words will be obvious, like the first one, vision, or your visual. is your sight. It's the ability using your eyes to see. And hearing is audition or auditorium or auditory. And of course, using the word auditorium, we can somewhat pair up that image in our mind and remember that the audition or the auditory words are related to hearing, as if we're in an auditorium listening to a speech or watching a performance, we are hearing it, and the auditorium is typically, or the auditorium or a amphitheater are typically shaped in such a way and acoustically constructed that the hearing of whatever is being said by the primary person on the stage is optimal. And so that helps us remember that word. Gustation or gustatory is your taste. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because the word gustation, if you rearrange the T and the S at the beginning, it spells the word guts. And I just think, when I think of gustatory or gustation, I think of my taste, because it seems to be directly tied to my guts and what I like to put in my guts or in my stomach or whatever. But that helps you remember that taste is going to be referred to as gustatory or gustation. Your smell is your olfaction or olfactory. And I just simply think of it as a factory where we're processing, and looks like we're processing a smell of oil. And but nonetheless, your olfaction or your olfactory, if you hear somebody talking about that, is going to be your sense of smell. And then finally, touch is just about as obvious as sight was, that it's tactician or tactile. And when I was in electronic component sales, I would sell small switches that were called tactile switches, made by a variety of manufacturers. And every time you push the switch, you get a click, a tactile response. You find these similar switches on the sides of your phones for volume and things of that nature. And so that is how you can remember tactile or touch. If you want, another way to remember a list like this is to pair up the initials. For example, sight and visual would be SV. Hearing and auditory would be HA or HA. The taste would be TG. The smell would be SO. And the touch, TT. So because you know SHTST is the sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, you just got to remember either VAGOT, VAGOT, and put them in a row, or SV, HA, TG, SO, and TT. Various ways you can put that together, and you could even start building visual mnemonics in your mind. When I think of SV, I immediately think of an SUV, and I think that's something I can see and behold as being pretty cool, pretty big, pretty audacious. For me, an SUV impacts my sight more than anything, more than any other thing. And then ha! If I heard somebody yell ha, I would recognize that that's part of hearing. TG doesn't have a whole lot going for it. I can't really think of anything. So I pretty much rely on my idea that gustation or guts is what reminds me that it's for taste. But that in itself, the fact that you can't think of anything in this entire setup, means that it's the one that you just can't think of. And if you can't think of it, you always remember that it's taste. If it's TG and you just like, I don't have a mnemonic for that, well, it must be taste. It's tasteless. It doesn't have a taste. And you can just kind of play that out. SO for smell, olfactory. So, oh, this stinks in here. So, it can just kind of be a response that helps you mnemonically remember it. And touch or TT. And TT just sounds like it's something. Actually, TT sounds like something you would say to a little one when you're asking if they want to go potty. And who wants to touch that? But and if I recall, when I was young, TT was a reference to the same idea. But whether you remember it mnemonically or not, at least recognize these words when you hear them, because other people will be giving great information out and only using these words, and you'll find yourself not sure of what they're talking about. But our five senses, in definition, allow us to experience the physical arena. No doubt this is our definition for this particular model, but that's basically what it is. These five senses allow us to experience the physical arena by passively receiving the signals that are produced by the physical arena. Now, you've got to ask yourself, and I'll give you a hint already. I'm going to tell you what you need to ask, and inherent in the question is going to be the answer. But you got to ask yourself, if we had other senses that could translate other properties of the physical world into our heads and into our minds, would we perceive the world different? If we had a sense that could bring in data at a different level, I don't know how to truly give you an idea of this. I can't give you an example, obviously, but let's say we had a sense. Now, we already have a sense of sight that gives us a perception of depth. But what if we had a depth and a mask? Let's call our senses meters and gauges for a moment. And what if we had a sense that everything we looked at, we also had a sense that did like a depth finding. Let's say we had a little laser light that was on our forehead, and everything that we looked at or processed through our eyes would also get processed through that, and it would give us a very impactful density and weight and depth reading. And of course we get some of that with our eyes, depth perception, and because of relationship to previous understandings, we get a weight understanding and even a density recognition as a result. But what if we had a separate sense that overwhelmingly gave us that type of information, and just dramatized it substantially more than we currently understand? Because how many times have you looked at a package and went to pick it up and it was not exactly the weight that you expected it to be? Maybe you threw your back out as a result, or you looked at something and said, yeah, I can lift that, I can move that, I can get that couch through that door, these type of things, and then suddenly you discover that you are unable to. But if you had a very clear and defined sensory perception of weight, size, height, density, depth, these type of parameters, then maybe you would be more productive and much more capable of defining those elements, and hence be a little more accurate in the things that you do along the line or along the way. But what if also at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, if you were not able to perceive any three-dimensional shapes and everything was two-dimensional, or you couldn't perceive color, which many people lose that ability to do? You can see on either end of that spectrum, suddenly your conscious awareness of the physical arena and your perception of it and your ability to derive information from it is suddenly impacted in such a way that you could either recognize it as increasing your vision or decreasing it for the ideas and the elements of thought that you are anticipating, which from our previous discussion in the physical arena is what we were referring to, is you change where you put yourself and what you do. And if you're standing, if you can ever get where you're standing amidst a very big and clear rainbow, such as the picture that I showed you, that can bring a sense of the size of the earth into view of your eye, and help you feel like you are that much more in control of the various aspects of life. Or it could also have the opposite effect and make you feel overwhelmed and like something is overbearingly putting a pressure on you. It depends on how you process it, of course. But my point is, these five senses, if we had an additional sense that could bring information in, then it would dramatically impact our current state of consciousness or our current state of reality. take it a step further, if we could mingle our senses, if we could smell what we see through the sight, or if we could see what we taste, or when we looked at a rose, we could taste that rose, that might be wonderful. Anytime we look at a cherry pie, if we could actually get the taste of the cherry pie in our mouth. But, as with anything, too much of a good thing is not good, and I would hate to have that ability in this world because of the many disgusting things that we see on a daily basis, whether it be the gutter, or what is in the bathroom, or what is even in our refrigerator at times. We wouldn't want to be able to process that all the time to that degree. And the same thing goes with our sensual senses. I would not want X-ray vision. Nobody wants to walk around and see everybody in the nude. Nobody wants to see what's going on behind the closed doors of every single home. What if you could see the good and the evil that goes about the world on a daily basis in a very clear perception? It would drive you mad, because I assure you there's more dramatic evil going on than there is dramatic good. And I think you would find yourself driven to a point of exhaustion trying to process all of it. So I say all that to give you an idea that the sensual arena is very much delineated between these five senses for a very good reason, and we have the ability to control those five senses and determine what it is that we want to see and can see and hear and taste and smell and touch. And then as a result, many of those senses often anchor us to experiences in our life in such a way that we're able to recall them simply by recalling the sensual record of what it is that we experienced. And if you had an extra sense, we would obviously call that the sixth sense, and that is an aspect of our model here. But let's say that the sixth sense was truly just nothing more, not the definition that we give in the sixth sense arena, but let's say it was just nothing more than that additional sense. There is, of course, a connotation to the term sixth sense that is derived from an amalgamation of all of these five senses, of all of these five senses put together, meaning that all five senses, when in harmony with one another, suddenly develop a sixth sense that allows you to perceive beyond the isolated input of each individual sense. And I will tell you that is a very valid representation of a sixth sense. That term works absolutely perfectly with the concept of the sixth sense in that idea. And because your five senses do work together, and when they work optimally, you end up getting something out of them that is not put into them. Let me give you an idea what I mean when I say that with regards to a rowing team. When rowers row, they all row together. If they want to be faster than the other team, they have to row in such perfect unison that the speed of the boat is actually greater than the combined force that they are exerting on the paddles against the water to pull them through the water. And the result is that the boat is moving so fast that they feel weightless and effortless in their paddle, because they are not pushing against any resistance due to the fact that the boat is moving faster than the force that they are exerting upon it. And it takes a good fast boat and a very skilled crew to get to this point, and for you to be able to have this ability. But when you do, it is an incredible rush and an incredibly exciting time, because suddenly you have put together all five senses, and the result is, when you put together all five senses, you've developed this sixth sense, this greater than the whole of the five, and you are able to experience that sixth sense through your kinesthetic sense and as well as your visual and possibly even a bit of your auditory sense, and you're able to recognize it, and it becomes euphoric in its own right. And this phenomenon is not only found in outrigger canoeing and other paddle sports, but literally it is the result of almost every sport and every area. If you look at Michael Jordan, what made him such an awesome basketball player is he was seeing beyond what everybody else was seeing, because his five senses were all working in unison to such a degree that the harmony produced a literal sixth sense. Tiger Woods or any other great golfer, anytime a golfer gets in the zone and he says, I just can do no wrong today, and he smacks the ball and it just drops right by the hole or near the hole or in the hole, the result is that he has so efficiently and so succinctly worked all those muscles that are necessary to hit the ball, that he was or is able to not even have to cognitively think about the hit. He knows exactly where it needs to go. He is sensing the wind, its direction and impact on the ball. He knows his clubs. He knows the flexibility of his body on that day, his energy level. He understands the distance to the hole, the size of the hole, the size of the ball, the weight of the ball. I mean, all of those factors are so ingrained in him that they are culminating into this kind of this sixth sense. So why do I say that when we're not talking about the sixth sense, we're talking about the sensual arena, is that you have to recognize that each input that's coming in is ultimately being mingled with all the other inputs, and to be able to purposely and effectively recognize that so that you can increase the sensual arena, or increase the sense that is necessary to culminate it into that definition of the sixth sense, that harmony of the five senses is incredibly important. So in take fishing for instance, it's a great that's a great venue for discovering the sixth sense, because it is possible to get on the lake and start reading the lake and utilizing your senses to determine how the fish are going to act or react to what bait. And this is really what fly fishing is much all about, is reading the water and the fish and knowing what fly to tie on, and then you add to that the much practiced element of casting your line and being able to reel it in and bring it, make the fly look live, and all these other factors that you don't want to have to cognitively determine one at a time. They culminate inside of the fisherman, to where after being on the river or the lake for a little bit, whether that means several months of constant fishing or even several hours during the day, at some point all of a sudden a fisherman can hit this stride and get into this zone and have this sixth sense phenomenon happen, and suddenly he's pulling fish out left and right while everybody else is sitting around trying to figure it out. That in every sport, I think, ought to be one of the primary focuses in every thing that we do. If we are trying to, if we are internet marketers or regular marketers and salespeople, if we are in advertising, we're always looking for the ability to touch that invisible realm, because it's the realm, it's the place when all those senses culminate that is going to lead us to great successes. Now, that is different than using the sixth sense arena to discover ideas. The sixth sense arena in the iGestalt creative thinking strategy is an actual physical arena that exists and contains a limited and a specific amount of data already predetermined. This sixth sense that we're talking about, and this is where I say some of these words have existing meanings, is just literally a culmination of those five senses producing the ability to perceive whatever is applicable at that moment, and to whatever discipline you are exercising, to perceive it in a higher realm, if you will, or in a more fluid manner, to where you're, in comparison to your competition, substantially better off and substantially quicker, faster, stronger, more aggressive, more useful, and more successful. So that's kind of just that delineation, but it's to just make you recognize that these senses have incredible impact on how you perceive the world and how you're able to demonstrate. When we look at the idea of visualization and the idea of the law of attraction and the idea of meeting with great people and great minds when trying to be a success, it's because what we're doing is we are working and using all those inputs to somehow create this sixth sense, this killer instinct, this ability. And when I teach sales, I teach killer instinct because it's this ability to be able to perceive your outcome before you ever get there. And then as you do, you're able to line up your five senses to take advantage of what that outcome is. And when they line up and that sixth sense in that sense appears, you are very clear in pushing and making your mark and hitting your mark. So these five senses they have a very, very valuable job in the entire spectrum of the seven arenas. They're passive collectors of information, and how they collect and how well they collect and how effective and clear they are at collecting is going to make all the difference in the world. Hence why I use a studio pair of headphones that are absolutely crystal clear, because I want to hear every possible aspect of whatever it is that I'm listening to, whether it's my own voice coming back through the microphone so that I can hear to some degree what you're hearing, or whether I'm watching a movie. And since I got these headphones, I discovered movies. The producers and the editors are creating a field of depth in the movie these days. I don't know how long they've been doing it because I haven't been able to hear it without my Dr. Dre Beats Studio headphones. But now that I have these, I'm able to hear crickets. I'm able to hear, if they are in a hospital, I can hear babies in the background. If they're out on the road, I can hear traffic that is miles away, because they have purposely edited it in order to create a depth to the experience that you are subliminally taking in. It takes away the flatness and gives it a much greater range of experience. And you can watch shows that you've watched 100 times, and with a good set of headphones and concentration, you're going to hear a lot of sounds that you never knew were in there, but they were purposely put there by the movie maker for the intent of increasing the depth of that which you collect into your mind. It makes the movie that much more exciting and that much more sensual, because it's additional senses being stirred at different volume levels, and many times the levels are so low that you're not even aware of it, but it creates depth and it gives you a better experience. It's like a 3D sound when it comes to the audible sense. But the Sensual Arena decodes these inputs, and then it also sends them to your brain. So the Sensual Arena, as we look at each one, has a physical job that it cognitively has to do, and it uses that part of your brain that is actually processing those signals that come in. And you'll discover here in this module that each one does it in a different way. That data comes in different forms, and then it is processed in your mind at the rate of the frequency that your brain is activated at or operating at. And so you're able to recognize when you're not able to recognize, but anything that comes in has an impact on that resonant frequency, and then the data gets transmitted and it gets processed inside your brain in different areas of your brain depending on the sense, but then all sent back down to a common area for that idea that I'm talking about, where the five senses are all brought together. And we will see that much more dealt with in the thinker aspect of the Eigestalt strategy. And finally, the Sensual Arena is the gatekeeper between the physical arena and all the other arenas. So not only does it collect, it also processes, and therefore it's the gatekeeper. That's its job. You've got the ability to let light into your eyes or not. Sometimes, of course, you're driving down the road, you can't help but let the light into your eyes. And if something horrific happens in front of you, someone gets hit by a car or a car crash or something of that nature, you almost have no choice but to witness it and for it to come in. But nevertheless, your sight was a gatekeeper. You could close your eyes and it would stop the thing. It just may be dangerous if you're driving. But at the same time, as you know, why are we rubberneckers? We go past an accident and we try our best to be able to see what's happening in the accident. But in reality, in my opinion, that's probably a negative thing. I tend to have a standing rule. I will break it if it deems necessary, but I try not to see people in their dying moments. I do my best. If somebody has, if I have a relationship with somebody, and I worked pretty extensively in senior living and had my share of losses of friends and people I'd grown close to. But if I have my druthers and my ability to, and there's no relational benefit for the other party or myself, I try not to see somebody in their dying moments. And I try not to look at pictures if it happens to be something gruesome of them after something has happened to them, because there is a lasting memory that affects my conscience, my subconscious, my psyche, and I understand that by allowing into my mind their final picture or their final rest, that it is going to be more of a lasting impression on me than all the wonderful life that I experienced with that person. And so I do my best not to see them in that kind of light. Do I not have long goodbyes? If I can avoid them, sure, but those are harder to avoid because the person continues on and they definitely are wanting to see you. But those last little moments, I prefer not to allow happen in my psyche because they're very impacting for me. So therefore, I have determined that I will protect my psyche and my persona by limiting the sense, all five senses, of being in that physical place. Or I don't go, I guess what I'm saying along the death line is I don't go to open casket viewings, and I don't purposely view somebody in their casket once they've passed. It just doesn't set well with me. There are other things that you can limit your mind to, and the gatekeeper is the sensual arena. You can determine whether you're going to listen to music that erodes your psyche and drives it along at a very simplistic pattern, or you can listen to music that's going to stimulate thought, and there have been many composers that have proven that their music stimulates thought. You can listen to music that'll stimulate negative emotions or positive emotions, and music that'll stimulate stress and anxiety, or music that'll stimulate a passive and relaxed atmosphere. It's all up to you, and you are the gatekeeper. You are the one that can determine. From the kinesthetic perspective, you're the one that can determine if you're going to put your hand on a hot stove, whether you're going to use incredibly hot water or cool water to wash yourself off with. All of these type of interactions go a long way to affect who you are and how you perceive reality and how you give back to the physical arena. And it all begins with your senses and you being the gatekeeper of those senses and determining how you're going to utilize them. And that would even go for what you watch on television, what you read, what you determine that you are going to take in educationally and physically and psychologically and spiritually, utilizing those five senses. Now let's take a look at the location of the sensual arena. It includes the part of the brain that decodes the incoming sensory signals as well. So we're talking about the five senses, but also we're talking about where it gets processed. And it gets processed in the brain, and that part of the brain that does that processing is included in our location of the sensual arena per this model. So obviously the sensual arena is connected directly to the physical arena through external body parts, your eyes, your ears, your tongue, your nostrils, and your skin. Nothing new to anybody. The sensual arena is connected to the brain through nervous system, and we have a couple of different nervous systems that we are able to point to. One of them being the autonomic nervous system, as seen here in Wikipedia. It's that part of the peripheral nervous system that acts as a control system, functioning largely below the level of consciousness, controlling visceral functions such as heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, salivation, perspiration, pupillary dilation, micturition, which is urination, sexual arousal, other aspects of the auto type of process. Then, of course, you also, and when I say auto type of process, I mean your automatic response system. We don't sit here and consciously count our heartbeats and worry about breathing and things of this nature. They're just they're automatic, and that autonomic system provides us with that regulation and that constant signaling that we need to do those things. Then, and again, per Wikipedia, the limbic system, as you see here, is controlling the functions of emotion and behavior and motivation, long-term memory, and other aspects of the sensual arena. And we'll get into those as we move forward. But we are, again, not trying to overwhelm you with this kind of data, and I don't need you to really memorize it so much as to be exposed to it and recognize how it is going to, how you have physical control of these elements as you maintain the gatekeeper of what comes in and gets processed as data. Now, some of the tangible attributes of this sensual arena are so. The sensual arena is by far one of the most tangible arenas of the other seven, other than the physical arena. You can see your hands, you can your eyes and your ears. They are physical. You can touch them. They're part of the physical arena. They actually don't become part of the sensual arena until the signal that is coming in is received. Once it's received by those physical arena-oriented receptors, then it becomes part of the sensual arena, and it starts going through the process of being translated by your brain and transmuted into a sense and passed on to the emotional arena. You'll notice that as we proceed through each of these arenas, the tangibility of each of these arenas starts to diminish, and we've talked about this in previous modules. The metaphysical, philosophical, psychological, and spiritual nature of each arena becomes more dominant, and the physical attributes become less dominant. And the sense arena is where this begins. A smell is non-visible, and a sound is non-visible. Yet it's very real. We can sometimes feel it through a strong bass speaker. We can obviously hear it, but the sound has no taste and the sound has no visual stimulation. And so the tangibility of it is starting to fall apart, and we see that. So what we do then is we describe the subsequent areas with greater tangible attributes to give them more relatable characteristics, which better helps us to understand them and interact with them. These first two arenas have some decent characteristics that are obvious and evident, but then there are some characteristics that we're not fully aware of, so we're going to explore those. The sensual arena is very tangible on a unified plane of human interaction with the physical arena, meaning no matter how rich you are, how poor you are, how smart you are, how deficient you are, whatever the case may be, you're interacting with the physical world the same way I am. It's kind of that old statement, you know, rich man, poor man, they both put their pants on the same way. We all have this level playing field provided we don't specifically have a specific handicap in any one of the 5 arenas or senses. And so all tangible attributes of the sensual arena are located external to the body, connected internally through a system, and each one respective in its function. We all have that same system. We all have the 5 same senses, and internally when they're connected, they all have their own respective function, and they all do the same thing. But when I taste something, it's the same as your taste. When I smell something, it's the same as your smell. Now, when I process it, I'm processing it against the backdrop of what my psychology is, and I also process it based on how sensitive that item is. For example, if you and I both listen to a piece of music and your ears naturally have much clearer tone the ability to process tone, and you can recognize tone, and music is very clear, and then you also have an education and an understanding of music, and you know something about the artist that made the piece, and you know something about music and how it's built up. Suddenly you have a greater appreciation, and it's a much bigger impact on you than it is on me, who has worked around airplanes a lot and gunfire and things that have caused my ears to be damaged and deteriorated from a sharp sounding instrument, and that sound, is obviously discernible by me, but it's totally respective to my psyche and how my 7 arenas process the sound. It doesn't mean that when somebody plays a horn that it sounds like a drum in my head and a horn in your head. Both of us, it sounds like a horn, but you may be able to recognize the fundamental frequency of that horn, what letter, what key that horn is being played in, what note of the key it's being played in. And you may even be able to hear some of the overtones and secondary frequencies that color that tone of that horn when that note is played, whereas I just hear it as a sound that sounds like a horn, and I have no frame of reference by which to place it in a key and know. And so my anticipation of the next note is significantly reduced, whereas your anticipation is heightened, and when it comes, it brings a whole level of satisfaction that I'm unable to relate to. And that's what I mean by its respectability to its function. Each one functions a different way, and it functions different in each human being. And once we can recognize this, realize that there are these tangible attributes and some of them intangible, and we recognize that we can control those senses, and we also recognize we can control the impact that those senses have on us. If you have a fuzzy outlook on life because you need glasses, and then you go get glasses, suddenly the crispness and the sharpness of that which you take in it increases your sensual processing. It increases the relationship that you have to the physical world, and it significantly impacts your interaction with it, and thereby adjusting your reality. And so to recognize that we have tangible attributes that we can physically connect to and change and affect us with and mold, then that gives us a better idea of how effective this sensual arena is in our overall seven arenas of the human experience. So we are going to take a break here and go in. When you head into the next video, we will talk about these 5 senses and give you a good idea of how they work, and it won't all be text. I know this is a frightening looking slide because I just want you to have it as a very clear definition for reference, but we'll have some videos and some other things that better describe the 5 senses so that you're aware, based on this introduction, of how valuable they are and how much control you have over each one of them. Alright, we'll look for you in the next video.